Atlas Network has done an incredible job creating and placing and growing all these organizations and so many entities that I couldn't even conceive of one in 1984, 1987. For that matter, some of those countries didn't exist in 1984 and 88.
Right.
But even in the US, among the state, there were only 10 or 11 sort of state-based groups.
Welcome to Atlas Network with Michael Carnuccio, the show where we introduce you to the courageous leaders and bold visionaries on the front lines of the global freedom movement. Today, I'm excited to bring you a conversation with Lawson Bader, President and CEO of DonorsTrust and the Donors Capital Fund. Now, Lawson and I caught up and had our conversation at the recent Atlas Network Liberty Forum and Freedom Dinner in New York City. You'll be able to tell the background and the lighting might be a little bit different, but I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. Lawson is a wealth of knowledge. He has deep roots and a long history in the worldwide freedom movement and a unique perspective from years of experience, but also personal relationships that have helped foster so much growth and so much success throughout the worldwide freedom movement. Atlas Network in particular wouldn't be where it is today without Lawson Bader. He's a friend and a true leader, and so I'm excited to bring our conversation with you now.
This is Atlas Network with Michael Carnuccio.
Lawson, thank you so much for being on the program. I've been excited about this conversation for a while.
Of course, Michael, happy to always be with you and have this conversation.
Let's start off with kind of the main discussion that you've been leading the last few years that's become really relevant in the worldwide freedom movement this year in particular, and that's leadership transition, right? Whether it be at the board level, whether it be executive leadership, or just departments and staff with projects, we're seeing a lot of movement with talent. And so you've been talking about this for quite a while. Why? And what are you seeing this year? Are you encouraged or concerned?
It's a good question. I have a unique position these last really 10 years to sit sort of a spot between and among the donor community and between and among the policy-oriented sort of think tank, et cetera, community, both internationally and domestically. I came from that world, so it's something that I'm sort of familiar with, and I have a sweet spot for it. But I've been watching these last couple of years, and that's exactly right. We're entering a period of transition, and it's on one hand natural when organizations are 20 years old, 25 years old, and many are. You have founder dilemma kinds of issues. Mm-hmm. You have younger staff who realize they're not going to necessarily advance any further. You have conflicted and changing policies and things to deal with. But you also have the externalities of politics being politics,
right,
and technology being technology, and donor pressure and donors changing, and you have that same generational change now among the donor community. And all this is sort of fomenting at a time, and it's reflected in our headlines, and it's reflected within our respective sort of freedom movement that is both here at home and abroad. And if I could have a dime for every time I had a phone call about, hey, do you know anybody who wants to fill in the blank? I have an idea about an organization. I'm concerned about why. We need board members. Our board members really don't understand how to actually be a board. They've just been the friend of the founder.
Sure.
All of this causes that uncertainty, that fomentation. And at the same time, and this is a little bit of a criticism, we've not put in the effort these last 5, 6, 7 years to that talent pipeline, frankly, the way we did in the late 80s, 90s, sort of 2000s. And I think we're paying for that a little bit, even though I think there's been a realization of that and we're kind of getting back to that. So all of this and more comes together at a time when it's a time of uncertainty.
It definitely is. So if we reflect back on the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, then we look at where we are today, what's instructive there? What advice or suggestions would you make for an organization or the movement at large to prepare and to start plugging in on?
Well, we should look in context of what and why.
Yeah.
So most of, when we talk about sort of the global freedom movement, if it's back in the 80s, it's predominantly a United Kingdom, the old Churchillian English-speaking peoples sort of thing. a little bit of Western Europe, predominantly U.S. focused. Really, until the late 70s, early 80s, there was not a U.S. freedom movement in the sense that we talk about it now.
Yeah.
And the majority of it was Washington, D.C. centric. So it was the creation of what we would call national think tanks.
Right.
This is where Heritage and Cato and even Reason, even though it wasn't that much a think tank, all were evolved to influence the national narrative at a time when the Cold War was still sort of going on, and it was about free enterprise specifically.
Right.
That's the genesis for so much. That has changed dramatically.
Good point.
What is freedom now? There is no Cold War. Things have gotten muddier. And so our focus was on that, the ending of that. It was a bit more black and white, to be honest. Now we have the global movement. Atlas Network has done an incredible job creating and placing and growing all these organizations and so many entities that I couldn't even conceive of one in 1984, 1987. For that matter, some of those countries didn't exist in 1984 and 88. Right. But even in the U.S., among the state, there were only 10 or 11 sort of state-based groups.
Right.
So now we have this incredible layer of complexity. That's good. That also means you have to manage that layer of complexity. But the talent was more of a thought talent. Why do you believe in freedom? Why do you believe in capitalism? Why are you not necessarily, how do you not want to be like the Soviets and communism? Mm-hmm. The nuance has now reached a point where it's unclear what defines freedom and what liberty. And we've lost, I think, and let's blame some of the college campuses for this as well, which we have to take responsibility for. So that's kind of what it's both our success and not managing that succession and transition that I think has put us where we are.
So as we talk about this evolution over time, I want to kind of insert the story of Lawson Bader in there because you have gone from growing and leading what Atlas Network has partner organizations to then being at the forefront of leadership. And now with your role at DonorsTrust that I want to talk about in a little bit, you're involved from a philanthropic and a board leadership position over quite a bit of the worldwide freedom movement. So take us back to the beginning. How and why did Lawson get into the freedom movement originally?
I wanted to be a hockey player when I grew up.
Fantastic.
That is not always the wisest thing to do in Northern California, particularly because I also didn't really know how to ice skate. I knew how to use figure skates. There's a difference there. I wanted to be a pilot. We might come back to that a little later.
Okay.
So but I always had that desire for American history, sort of politics, not so much politicking as it is the intersection of policy and ideas.
Yeah.
Knew I wanted to be in Washington, D.C. like so many other young 20-something or others. And I did that for a while, worked down the hill, all the usual. But it was actually a chance lunch with David Knott, who at the time had just left Shell and had taken over this weirdly named Center for the Study of Market Processes, which is a horrible name to have in today's marketing environment.
Right.
And we had a mutual friend who said, you need to have this guy meet with David. David and I had lunch. And 3 months later, I was the fourth employee of the Center for the Study of Market Processes, where I spent the next 16 years helping develop what ultimately became the Mercatus Center at George Mason. And that was the launch of all of that. And it was both active in economic education, working on the Hill in the academic ideas of freedom and economics and classical liberalism. That's where I was versed and stewed, even though I was innately that way before I came there. That gave some depth to why you thought certain things. And from there, I became the president of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, which is another Washington, D.C. think tank. Speaking of transitions, I was the first president after Fred Smith, after 25 years, stepped away. Still worked for me, by the way, to allow that transition to occur. Mostly regulatory, energy, environment, very much involved in some of the Obamacare legislation and litigation. And then through various circumstances, wound up unexpectedly, really, replacing the late Whitney Ball 10 years ago to run DonorsTrust and Donors Capital Fund, sort of shifting away from the active side to now the philanthropic side. And that's been the last 26, 28, 29 years.
What are maybe one or two things about leadership in the worldwide freedom movement, and specifically with organizations like think tanks or like freedom-loving advocates that you have experienced through the time, Mercatus Center, growing that, and then a leadership transition at CEI, and then now where you're at? Give some advice for us on what you've learned.
Well, the first thing is you're not as unique as you think you are. Well, you might be, Michael, of course. This thing we call the freedom movement, which in itself is somewhat of a nebulous concept, goes back not just to 1979 or 1902. It's the history of sort of Western thought.
Yeah.
And these institutions have been built on philanthropists and donors and entrepreneurs and business to create what we call this market economy.
Sure.
And then the academics come in and give some other labels. But the point is that I inherit. And oftentimes we as CEOs, whether you are founding your own organization or not, you are still inheriting an idea and work that has been done before. And that doesn't negate that, nor does it mean you shouldn't revisit certain things.
Good point.
But to see yourself as a part of a much larger narrative. And I think that's the most important aspect when leading an organization. And secondly, is to realize you are not in the John Donne way an island. That there is and there are the network abilities to work with each other. And that is the only way I think we succeed. Those of us on the right are often accused of being more individualistic at SI, and there's a truth in that. But where I think Atlas Network has been so unique is building the individuals as part of a community. So the CEO comes in and realizes, I've inherited something, so I need to be protective of that, willing to take risks, but I also now have a larger network that I need to be a part of, that I also need to show others to lead with that as well. And then thirdly, just a sense of, you got to have a sense of humility and a sense of, frankly, humor.
Right.
Because this is a 2 steps forward, 8 steps back, 4 steps latitude. That's just the nature of the game. And so you've always got to put it in perspective. So that's what I would say initially. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about DonorsTrust.
Sure.
And I think what a lot of people hear of DonorsTrust, and they know about the philanthropy and the generosity that comes through there. But they also, I think, don't understand how DonorsTrust works and what it is. And it's quite amazing and pretty impressive and important organization. And you've done quite a bit to grow it and have impact since you've been there. So I know you won't talk about that unless I make you. So can you talk to us a little bit about DonorsTrust?
Sure. So DonorsTrust is actually a simple idea. So we're 25, 26 years old, and it serves 2 primary purposes. The first is the primary purpose, which is to preserve the charitable intent of self-identified conservative libertarian donors during their lifetime and after. And we can go into why that matters, but that's our primary purpose. Yeah. But secondly, is to ensure a revenue stream to organizations around the globe, mostly domestically for various reasons, that are in some way promoting, advocating, defending limited government, personal responsibility, free enterprise. And then thirdly, and it is in that order, to ensure a revenue stream to sort of larger civil society. This is where we get into the art galleries, the churches, the synagogues, the kinds of things that are the fabric of our localities that are equally important, but are still addressing a problem, solving an issue without asking the government to do it or to grow in scope or scale. That's what we do, and that's what we'll always do. I laugh when I took over 10 years ago and I got the quintessential question of, what's the vision? Where are you going to go in the next 5 years, 10 years? And I look at them and say, to be the same damn organization in 10 years that we were 10 years ago, because that's the promise, because we cannot be a bait and switch. And so that's what we have done. And, from that initial $300,000 gift, we've grown to about $1.4 billion in assets that might be changing as I am recording this conversation with you, because it's not intended to stay in our bank. It's intended to go out to serve those primary purposes.
So I'm fascinated by the juxtaposition that we see happen a lot in modern philanthropy, where the original intent once it gets a generation or two down the line, is no longer that intent. It is, even if it stays with the family, it typically moves. You're painting a different picture about an opportunity for a generosity that continues on that intent long after someone is making their own decisions. So how does that work necessarily, and what kind of impact are you seeing in the philanthropic movement by DonorsTrust growing?
So our primary mechanism by which we do this is we are not a private foundation. We operate a donor-advised fund, which is a generic concept. We just happen to apply it fairly narrowly. But the challenge of donor intent, or the lack of donor intent, has disproportionately hurt conservatives over the last 100 years, really. And if we go back stereotypically, look at those great American 20th century private foundations, your Rockefeller, Pew, MacArthur, Carnegie, that built the country. And in return, philanthropically did unbelievable, amazing things. Those organizations today more or less fund entities that would make their original wealth creators roll over, and in many ways are antithetical to the ideas of liberty and free enterprise, et cetera. So that's your institutional challenge. At the same time, there is so much data that looks at second generation, third generation when it comes to wealth. And I'm not talking billionaires. We're talking $5 million of estates. And if you throw into real estate, that's going to capture a larger percentage of the population, whereby by the end of the second generation, 70% of that wealth is gone. And by the end of the third generation, 90% is. Money Magazine talks about the average inheritor takes exactly 6.5 days before he or she buys a new car. Now, maybe you need a new car. But I'm not trying to poo-poo that idea. The point is that there's a lesson in both how wealth preservation is made in the appropriate way, but most importantly, how conservative libertarian type giving needs to be preserved, because the amount of money that has been lost to those principles is staggering. And we are now, here's a great example. Of the top 200 private foundations in the United States right now by assets, 6 are identified as quote unquote conservative family foundations. And the highest among them does not appear till about 118 on the list. Now, that does not mean that the top 117 are all liberal progressive. But you look at the top 10 or 15 and most of them are. So it's an uphill battle. We're coming in to try to sequester that. And as we grow, more and more is sequestered. So a lot of our mission is talking to donors about talk to your children and the grandchildren to understand why you're giving, because giving should be strategic. It's not just being charitable. There's a very, very big difference.
One of the things that fascinates me most about DonorsTrust and the donor-advised structure and opportunity, and that you really brought in with your leadership, is the idea that you don't have to be at the end of the career or the end of your life in order to start a donor-advised fund or start contributing. In fact, you and I were part of an event several years ago that had young leaders, and here I'm getting to MC an event that has Royce Young, a former NBA analyst, now at the time transitioned to the Oklahoma City Thunder's front office after they went to the finals, and Lawson Bader talking about investing in the future on stage together, back to back, in a captive young audience. So talk about that for a little bit, because I think a lot of our audience is in that demographic and would be interested.
Well, in the same way, we need to develop the talent to be future board members of organizations, and future talent to simply run and staff and engage and be creative in the diversity of that larger community. We also need to be focusing on the next generation of funders, particularly if so much of our message is fund now, sunset. Don't wait 30 years, because now is the opportunity. But to be strategic about it, then we have an obligation to develop that relationship with that second, third, fourth generation. So we developed something called the Novus Society, for example, which was anybody under 40. We essentially made it, well, let's just say it's a losing financial deal for DonorsTrust. But we make a very minimum amount that you need to open with, because for us, it's about the why, not about the comma. And my children, when they graduated from college, they got a donor-advised fund, for $500 that they can put money into and grow. But the point was the strategic value. And as I said earlier, it's not just feeling good about something. It's not just giving something away, which is a phrase that I do not like, actually, because it implies you didn't earn it. But anyway, secondary conversation. It's to recognize of the why. And just as we were talking today earlier at the Atlas Network event on donors who maybe have single causes, single interest, environment. I care about health. It's all good stuff. How do you go upstream to recognize so many of the problems that you're trying to deal with are questions of freedom and human liberty, and frankly, regimes that are autocratic that are actually causing the problems that lead to the downstream problem that you're trying to address, and to look at it as human freedom, and to get that second generation and that third generation to see the world in that way. They don't have to vote the way their parents do. That's a different conversation, but they do need to understand the power of giving. And because if we don't do it, if we don't encourage philanthropists, we wind up in a situation where we simply grow the state. And that is antithetical to our purpose.
Folks, if you'd like to learn more about Donors Trust and you have interest in a donor advised fund, you can find that information going through atlasnetwork.org. And by the way, while you're there, take a look at Atlas Network's donor retreat that will be happening next year in late May in Berlin and going through Bavaria down through Munich. You won't want to miss that. But again, Donors Trust information can be found going through atlasnetwork.org. Lawson, I want to shift to now being at Donors Trust and serving on boards of organizations, some directly through your role, just others because of your relationship and experience, but you're seeing the state of the worldwide freedom movement, and you're also seeing the state of political activity and the way it's moving around the country and actually around the globe. What are you seeing with that? What are you picking up on? What's your perception?
Yeah. So for the last 9 years, I've been fortunate to be both on the Atlas Network board and the State Policy Network board. I chair the latter. I've been vice chair of Atlas. It sounds like it's a conspiracy of taking over the world, but that's a different question. So it's allowed me both the local and the domestic, and a couple of observations. One is the line is not black and white. You and I, in our earlier careers, have spent time representing U.S. think tanks, spending time with our partners overseas, and to realize that some of the challenges are not unique to just New Jersey, Oklahoma, or Washington, D.C., as they are in Germany, France, Indonesia, et cetera, that how you run something effectively. So I think that line being blurred about how and the why what we do has been strengthened. So that's been a good thing. I think a secondary frustration is, from a philanthropic standpoint, so much of the philanthropic wealth in the world is in the United States. And I have tried to do what I can to get some of that out to go into the larger freedom community. Some of it is as practical as return on investment, that costs are higher in the US, and a group in Lithuania can do a lot more with less, but what they can do can be very powerful.
Absolutely.
So that sort of assimilation, I think, has actually been a positive. On the concerning front is, from a global perspective, and if I might even say a domestic perspective, we've seen a retreat in the idea of human freedom. I think Tim Reynolds talks about the dramatic change in the numbers of people who were at one point living in moderately free societies has plummeted in the last 15 years. I'm not going to say the United States is authoritarian, but there are even our own challenges we have when it comes to philanthropic giving and free speech and whatnot that are problematic. And so there's been this retrenchment that seems perplexing, particularly if we go back to our earlier conversation about those late 80s, late 90s, when we seem to be expanding freedom in the world, and now we're retracting, and why? And it's unsettling. And while I'm not necessarily optimistic, I remain hopeful, but that hope requires action and a return to North principles. Why do you believe what you believe? How do we lean on each other in more specific ways? Because we're all sort of suffering from the same problem. How do we train donors? The world's a little scarier. The world's a little more transparent. And I think now, with the disruption of AI and other things, we're in a catch-up phase, but it's a phase we don't understand. And I think the freedom movement is going to look different 5 years from now, just because the times are changing so quickly. How do we market what we do?
Yeah.
How do we deal with
Great.
speech questions? How do we deal with authenticity when some of that is uncertain? There's just some challenges, which is why, for example, the talent development, developing CEOs who think less as I am the head of an organization, but I am part of a team. That C-suite mentality, I think, is actually very important. How do we get boards and how do we get donors to recognize the complexity so that donors don't bind the hands of organizations who are having to wrestle with this as well, nor do they necessarily lose faith. And I think in a more cynical world, I think some donors are losing some faith too, and that's unfortunate.
What? Let me ask you specifically there, because I know you're having these conversations quite a bit with donors, and they're thinking about maybe with a donor advised fund or maybe just with an individual contribution. They may have this. Does it make a difference? Can I really help? Is this the right way for me to invest and participate in philanthropy for what I believe in? What do you say to them when you have those?
Well, let me give you an answer that's somewhat based on sort of a period of time from 2020 to about 2022.
Sure.
So we're dealing with post-COVID world and reactions to that. And what I saw happen with our clients and some of the organizations that we were working with was just a pivot that you had to do policy-wise to, something just happened. And now issues popped up about telemedicine and getting people back to work and all of that. That's great. But for so many people, everything became local. So think about the fact that so many people moved for different reasons.
Good point.
And all of a sudden, the donor has said, I'm no longer going to be in New York because of X, Y, and Z. I'm now going to move to wherever. That could be because of remote work. It could be in reaction to state policies as it affected COVID. Doesn't matter. And at the same time, they look to Washington, D.C. with, we've had this conservative libertarian network in place for 30, 40 years. How do we get to this point? It's a fair question. And yet here I am now in my little local town, and I'm seeing my theater closed or the school closed. And I'm either gonna, you know what? I'm kind of done with the national public policy space. So now my local think tank, the state-based work, is now going to get my activity because everything became incredibly local.
Interesting.
And that you began to see the state policy network groups actually started to get more money because that focus came in. But it also became, I need that movie theater open. This is now my town. And that social fabric that I alluded to earlier, that relationship of citizen and state and that civil society became a little more intense. So I saw giving shift either completely away from the policy community. It's like, I've been doing this for 20 years, I'm done. I now got to focus locally, to now I'm seeing it begin to expand a little bit more. So there's been this dip.
Sure.
I still think it's local.
Okay.
I still think everything is still primary focused, but we're also seeing within the United States the disruption of our presidential politics these last years, that has caused schisms and inflection points between libertarians and conservatives. And that's real. It's very real right now. But I'm starting to see money kind of pour back into some groups, but I'm also seeing clear battle lines about that. And with this retrenchment in the in overseas, and that's also of concern. But to your ROI question, this is one that I've always found was important. More and more donors are asking that question. They're willing to place a bet. They're willing to take a risk. They understand the nuance of trying to teach and learn, and the policy making of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. They get all of that. But they also want to understand, if I only have $10,000, I want it to be used correctly. And if you don't really need it, if I give it to you or if I don't give it to you and nothing happens, where else am I going to go? So the questions that we get from our clients and others is much more specific about who is doing the best work in fill in the blank and who is working well with fill in the blank. Those are the questions that our donors are asking a lot right now. And as a result, organizations need to be a little more aggressive in understanding what their role in what their cog in the wheel is, to use
That's good.
that phrase. The wheel is a good thing. What their piece of it is, how it relates to others, and to communicate that back to donors who are frankly trying to solve a problem, which is, I have limited resources. Where can I best do that? So that's changed. That's a long way of sort of showing this.
Yeah,
dip.
but this is good.
But there are a lot more questions about ROI, who's doing good work, and will you remain true to your North Star? That values question is now being asked a lot more.
You mentioned North Star there at the end. You mentioned what an organization's role and function might be. And these are things that Atlas Network has programming set up for partners. North Stars, of course, is part of the Atlas Network Partner Consulting and then Executive Accelerator. And there's so many programs that Atlas Network will do to help their peer organizations with this. So you uniquely have gone from a partner that has been through some programs and engaged with Atlas Network to being on the board and also being a philanthropist that's investing and supporting programs through Atlas Network. Can we talk about your partnership with Atlas Network, what that experience has been like?
Yeah, sometimes it's not always great when you see how the sausage is made, and then you become on the donor side, which is not always a fair thing for Atlas Network and others. But on the other hand, I also know how the sausage is made because I have buried the bodies and made the sausage. So I understand, no judgment. It's fine. It probably puts me in a unique role. I think what has always, just to answer the question, what's always attracted me to Atlas Network is this commitment to the fact that freedom is not something that's inherently owned by the United States. It is a global concept. If we're going to use the phrase human right, that is what it comes into. The United States is unique in the history and the development of what that means as it weaves its way through cultural and political institutions. But this is a human condition of aspiring for freedom and liberty, and that it needs to be lit and relit continually. And where I think Atlas Network that has really emphasized was going to teach the why, not teaching how to be political. It's, what are these values? Or your parents came out of a communist side in Eastern Europe. So you have this natural anathema to something, but you need to understand why that is and how to prevent a return to something like that. And Atlas incubates, and they do what they can to coach. They do what they can to compete, to use sort of the phrase that is part of what they do, because competition is a good thing, to aspire and encourage and parent, if you will, in the appropriate way, that we want our kids to grow up, to be successful, and then we want those kids to teach the next kids. And Atlas has a wonderful job being behind the scenes, but also being very willing to step up and call a spade when a spade is, and be the lifeline that these groups need. And to, again, solve a problem for donors, which is Atlas Network has information. Those donors know they're doing something. I trust you. You go make the grant. You make it possible. And that is where that partnership is so important. And as a board member, the board takes very seriously Atlas's mission. I've been on a lot of boards, and I continue to be on boards. The Atlas board is very responsible for what are our North Stars. Let's hold the staff accountable. Let's hold each other accountable to being what we need to be and what the staff needs from us. To be very clear about what's expected of a board member. And that is a leading reason why so many Atlas board members serve on other boards as well. And how they help all these network organizations develop and grow, and not just give the old teach a fisherman story, but it's really about, I'm more interested in the conditions necessary for the village and the country to grow. And those are those first principles that Atlas has always done so phenomenally well at promoting.
Lawson, we're coming together having this conversation in New York City at the annual Liberty Forum. The Freedom Dinner, of course, will occur here in just a little bit. This is an event that's somewhat unique, that it's not just partner organizations, but a lot of donors participate as well. So I know why it's good for partner organizations and leaders throughout the worldwide freedom movement to be here. Why should donors participate in this? And if you come across a philanthropist that says, hey, I've heard about this LFFD, should I go next year? What would you say?
Yeah. Nice jargon, the LFFD.
Right.
That's good. The power of the New York event, and I would say the power of each regional event, which has the same opportunity.
Good point.
Is that this is a family affair. that is a continually growing family. And if you are looking for encouragement, if you are looking for that opportunity to meet an incredibly bright, inspired, hopeful individual and teams of individuals trying to improve the human condition through human flourishing by focusing on freedom, this is the place to be. It's a salve. I've always viewed it that way, because you'll go back to your respective home, or even, well, I go back to what I do, which is correlated, and I still have a few inspirational stories that remind me of why we do this. And it's not a closed audience. And so there is no other, in the larger global movement within the State Policy Network, within the Atlas Network, this is a very, very unique event. And I tell a lot of donors, if you want to understand the power of human freedom globally, then you come to New York in November and you just listen. And it's a lovely, wonderful, somewhat exhausting, but appropriately exhausting experience. And just even the camaraderie to see all the awards that are given out, and you realize how seriously all those partners take those awards. That's a big deal. And sometimes we can get a little cynical about, really, $1,500? It's $1,500 that you'd be surprised what can be done with $1,500 in some places. And that's an encouragement. Back to the ROI question, come to New York and learn that the global freedom movement truly is a global movement, and that your contribution is an incredibly important piece of that.
You've mentioned your time on the Atlas Network board, and point out that this event it kind of is the capstone of that tenure. Now, the way the board term works, you could possibly join again in the future, but let's hypothetically play for right now that this caps your time and leadership and the cycle you've gone from a partner organization all the way through now leading and helping grow, and which Atlas over that time has grown significantly. The Atlas Network is doing wonderful things all over the world now. If this is the last moment of leadership for you, what's some parting advice that you have for your peers on the board or the leadership team at Atlas Network that you would charge to guide them with?
First of all, remind ourselves why we do this, that we ourselves as former board members, or in some case current board members, if I'm speaking to them, that they're inheriting what Anthony Fisher put together. But Anthony Fisher is inheriting what previous generations put together and learned. And that's part of that continuity, that we're simply putting a word onto it called the Atlas Network. And to not forget that moment in time in which you're engaged is just a snapshot in a much larger, more powerful narrative. And our job is to continue that narrative so that when that entire board is brand new, and in however many years we're gathering in New York or someplace else, and every single CEO is brand new, those conversations are still continuing, as if we were not here. And that's okay. And again, especially as these folks are going back to a lot of countries where there is great turmoil and great threat, or great opportunity, that they recognize the why and that they are part of this network, and board members are most important for being engaged. And those board members need to also go see and visit the partner organizations. It's not just coming to 2 board meetings a year. It's getting on an airplane, going to Europe, going to Asia, going to Africa, to see those regional forums in place, because the impact of going to that I will be involved with Atlas whether they want me or not. I'm going to be engaged, if maybe selfish reasons, that it's my peeps.
You mentioned just the uniqueness and some of the environments that partners are going back to. I had the pleasure of talking with a TFA finalist, of course, the Templeton Freedom Award finalist there, using another acronym, who just happened to mention right before we started taping, he was on the phone with the security for when he lands, that he has to escort him around because of how dangerous it is to do this work. And I'm thinking back to when I ran a free market think tank in Oklahoma, and never in my mind
would have
did I imagine that. But you've seen many partner organizations go through that, and it's quite inspiring. It kind of reminds you about the fight. Right?
No, there are donors who will come and say, "Oh, I wasn't able to meet with so and so." It's like, well, the government didn't allow them to leave.
Right.
Happens all the time.
Right.
The visa, wait, you need a visa to come to it. That's just that reminder
Right.
of how context matters and reinforces the respect that we have for so many folks for whom the costs of this are far more significant than we realize.
We spent a lot of time talking about your experience and kind of your advice going forward. Can we take a couple minutes and just talk about Lawson for a second? So I've noticed something about you every time I run into you at one of these events, or if I even just bump into you in DC and in the middle of our working days. I know that you're quite busy and you've got a ton on your plate, but you're always excited. You're always positive, right? So what has you excited? What's keeping it going so long?
The cynical answer is alcohol.
Yeah,
but that probably
Noted.
should not be. Yeah, we'll cut that one, right? And that's fine. People already assume it. That's fine. It's in this business, it can be. It's easy to get despondent.
Sure.
At the same, but I think comes down to the people.
Yeah.
It's entirely the relationships and the people we meet, whom we adore. We roll our eyes over every now and then, who we realize are also in that shared partnership, and the respect and appreciation we have for that. That's why. It would be a very lonely place if you did not have the creativity and the craziness of those of us who were involved in this space.
Right.
When we maybe could have done something else much more boring or vanilla, but no, that's what it is. And so, yes, and it's also an expectation that and it's not a false humility that I'm in a position to be able to help. And I don't want to just say, I'm with the government, I'm here to help. It's like, no, my obligation with what I do, the gift that I have been given with the responsibility of running DonorsTrust and all these boards, is to ensure that I am imparting everything that I know, that I hope to be true, that I would have wanted imparted to me. And that doesn't mean that I'm asking questions of other people to learn too. And so there's a bit of an obligation that I need to make myself available, because folks who are always saying, can I have 5 minutes? Can I have 10 minutes? They're asking the right question. They're doing their job. And my job is to respond accordingly because of that partnership. And it's just how we have to act. Donors who come in thinking, I'm not going to take any time to meet with people, have misunderstood why they are doing what they're doing. So they should be busy too.
You and I have enjoyed some great meals around the globe. But if we were having this conversation, in your backyard or at the office or something, and I said, all right, let's go eat, Lawson. And what is the one thing, what is Lawson's go-to? Take me to your world. What are we eating?
So there's 3 quick answers. I happen to live in a part of Northern Virginia that's known as Koreatown. Ooh. And if I drive 1.5 miles down the road to downtown Annandale, which is really just a zip code, every restaurant is Korean. And so the natural aspect is, let's just get Korean.
Sure.
There's one at every street corner. Right. So there's that. There's a particular Italian restaurant that you and I have been to that Cynthia and I go to on a very regular basis, even though there's nothing about me that's Italian.
Right.
But if I had to choose an ethnic food at any moment, it would be Greek.
Greek.
I could eat Greek food all the time.
Yeah.
But I don't live in Greece. So, that's fine. So, yes, it would be Italian, Korean, maybe Greek.
So when Lawson's not on serving at a board meeting or a DonorsTrust activity or traveling around the world to do one or the either, what's Lawson's hobby? What do you do?
I think based on that question, I might be sleeping.
Yeah,
probably about all that.
That's all you got in there.
Right. So I fly airplanes.
Well, you mentioned wanting to be a pilot before. I didn't know we'd come back to this.
I about 5 years ago got tired of looking in the mirror and seeing a very disappointed 8-year-old boy who always wanted to be a pilot. And I said, I'm just going to go do this. I didn't even tell my wife.
Really?
In fact, first word she got of it was when I showed her my student pilot's license. Of course, her reaction was, of course you did. And so, so I got my private pilot's license, and I don't have the time to hop in an airplane and fly someplace for 3 days and come back, nor do I necessarily want to, own an airplane. But if anybody wants to buy one for me, You know where I am. But, you know, Cynthia and I occasionally, if the plane's available to rent, we'll fly over the Shenandoah Valley and for
Really?
sunset, or I'll take friends up and we'll draw a circle around 100 miles and we'll go for a trip. But yeah, I'll fly. And if I have the time, I'd fly it more.
I thought it was cool that we were doing this pod from like the top of a building in New York City. We could have been doing it 30,000 feet in the air or whatever with you at the wheel.
Technically, with my license, 30,000 would get me a large helicopter or fighter pilot behind me. I shouldn't be up that high.
Yeah, fair point.
But yeah, no, well,
come to technicality.
Come to
we'll
DC.
at that time.
We'll go flying. Yeah.
Lawson, last question I have for you today, and it's a question I love asking every guest. I can tell that you have this hope. You've always had it. I can hear it in your voice. You wouldn't be doing what you did if you didn't have a hope or have a hopeful future. What is it that gives you hope?
The human condition is based at the end of the day on the freedom to prosper. That doesn't mean we prosper equally. We can have a conversation about that, but we all want the freedom to prosper. And that means different things to different people. You want to go off and make money and have as many yachts as you can. That's great. You want to go off and cure cancer. That's great. As I say, along the way, one of you may be creating jobs for millions. Another one's going to soothe the shattered soul. Those are equally valid. But it's that yearning for freedom, and then that does not mean isolation, because it's always done in the context of community. That's ultimately, I think, what we aspire to, we want our children to have. That's how we want them to flourish, but to see it in that freedom to prosper, recognizing it's messy. The outcomes are always different, but that's what makes tomorrow interesting.
Lawson, thank you much for your time. This has been a true treat. You're such a special leader with tremendous impact. I really appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation.
Thanks, Michael. This was fun.
And folks, thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Atlas Network with Michael Carnuccio. You can find other episodes of this podcast wherever you consume a podcast, YouTube, Apple, or Spotify, or anywhere else that you can get your podcasts. And I want to encourage you one last time to go to atlasnetwork.org. And while you're there, join the Atlas Club with my wife and I, and support other organizations and our peers throughout the worldwide freedom movement. Until next time, have a blessed day.